Hi everyone. So let me start by asking a few questions today. Does any one of you in your entire life know someone that who has ever taken a medication? Right? Now let me ask another question. Do you know what clinical trials are all about? Now let me ask you a final question. Do you know anyone in your life or someone that has ever participated in a clinical trial conduct? Take a pause and think about it. Why? Why is it so that in our entire lifespan, we rarely know people who have participated in clinical trial studies today, knowing the fact that when every medication that we are taking today depends on one? And this is the question that actually changed my perspective about clinical trials as well. Earlier part of my career, I always used to think that clinical trial is all about processes, data, numbers. Sometimes it's all about the protocols, the standard operating procedures. It's a very solid engineering process, all important, all necessary. A few years ago, we actually conducted a detailed research, and there was a shocking revelation that came to the table that only 5% of the global population today participates in clinical trial studies. And this is due to certain barriers. One is about perception. There is a little bit of a fear due to lack of awareness and about understanding of how clinical studies work. There are certain times financial barriers that the patients face, and certain times it's the emotional barriers of taking care of the caregivers. How do you balance between your jobs, your family, and then participate in the clinical studies conduct as well? And in addition to that, there are also societal and cultural barriers as well. Now, interesting enough, a few years back, I actually met Mohini, a 39-year-old mother of two kids, and she was participating in a clinical study conduct. She was suffering from progressive illness. And when I asked her, why are you a part of this study? What is the motivation? What's going on in your mind? And she said something which really shook me up. She said, I'm not here just for the science, but I need more time. More time to have that one more birthday celebration with my daughter, one more time to attend that school recital. And this is where, when all the data points and the graphs just fell away, this is the time when I started looking at not just patients as subjects, but patients as human beings who have a hope for that second chance to get that more time. Similarly, a few years back, I was attending a patient advocacy event. And there, I saw a dynamic Alice, a 25-year-old woman who was delivering a speech and telling her story. At the age of 18, she was actually diagnosed with a late-stage cancer. And unfortunately, the investigator site told her, or the doctor told her, that you probably will have to go back home because you've got only 6 months to live. The primary care failed completely. And as a part of that process, there was just no option available for her. Now, her sibling, a 15-year-old sister of hers, did not give up. She did not give up because she went ahead and did detailed research. She did all the Google searches and found out finally that there was a study being conducted in Tufts University for a similar oncology condition. Now, the challenge here was that the study was almost halfway through. But knowing the fact that Alice met every single criteria of the patient inclusion, and not only that, but this was her only last hope to survive, she was allowed to participate in this clinical study conduct. And behold, 5 years later, I was watching her delivering that speech with great enthusiasm because she was cancer-free and she was able to live and get that second chance to survive. And at that point of time in my life, there were three realizations that happened. The first one, that even today, there is still a very strong lack of understanding of what clinical studies are all about, and there is still a lack of skepticism in terms of clinical trial participation. The second one was that why is it that clinical trials, even today, are being recommended as the last resort and not as an alternate care to the primary care that has been happening? And last but not the least, that even though clinical studies today are a well-thought, documented scientific process, but at the end of the day, it made me realize there are actually true stories of human beings as patients with a hope for a second chance to live. So in this clinical process, who are these key stakeholders who make these things happen? Imagine an orchestra, right? You're going to a symphony, and as a part of that symphony process, you see an orchestra that delivers a beautiful piece of music in front of you. But as that music gets delivered, there are hundreds of people behind that symphony to make that happen. It's exactly how you get a medication on the pharmacy shelf today, right? But before the medication comes onto that pharmacy's shelf, there is people who have worked behind this. And who are these people? Let's start talking about the patient. The patient is the soloist in this entire symphony, who has the courage to participate in a clinical trial conduct. And then, of course, we have the doctors, nurses, and the investigator sites who are setting the tempo of this orchestra to make sure that the study is conducted appropriately. And then we have the scientists who are the composers of the music to make sure that the study design is perfectly managed. Then we have the study site coordinators and the study managers who ultimately make sure that the rhythm of the music continues to play very well because the study has to be successful. And also then you have the safety experts and the regulators who are making sure that all the stakeholders are staying true to the music and making sure that any kind of a deviation or a safety adverse event is being not only reported but is managed very effectively as well. And in addition to all these key players, you also have a lot of invisible players behind the scenes who are working to make this study happen. You have the clinical supply chain team that's making sure that the right drug is reaching at the right patient in the right time. You have the data managers, you have the biostatisticians, you have the statistical programmers, and many such invisible players who are ensuring that this entire study is conducted flawlessly and making sure that no patient or no patient data is left behind. And that's why I believe that clinical research is one such intricate symphony that works well because there is a documented scientific process trusted by people. And every single stakeholder plays their role very well, not just because they're following a process, it is because they're following a purpose of getting new therapies into the market for the patients. So now that we talked about the stakeholders, what is clinical study? What happens in a clinical study process? Let me try and give this example, comparing this to a construction of a bridge, right? Now, when a bridge is being constructed, you have the designers, the contractor, the architecture coming together and building up a design of a bridge and looking at the material to see if the bridge that they're going to build can carry the weight for the purpose that it is being built. And once that design is ready, then you start building the foundation, you build the pillars, and on the pillars, then you set the base. The clinical study conduct is something very similar. The study or a drug, even before it is approved and brought into the market, has to go through multiple test phases. So as soon as a molecule is developed, there is a robust study design that comes into play. That study design makes sure that every aspect of that study conduct is taken into consideration. Examples like what should be the patient inclusion-exclusion criteria? What kind of dosage information needs to go into that protocol? What is the endpoints or the data points that needs to be looked upon for that final drug to be approved at the end of the process? And many such things, and every aspect of clinical study conduct has been recorded. And once that design is ready and as the molecule is approved in the early phase in the lab, then the molecule is moved to the phase 1. What phase 1 means is the first in human trial, where a select group of patients are then selected and they're being tested upon the drug in a very controlled environment in a hospital unit. And if the safety and efficacy of that drug is proven in that phase 1, only then the drug moves on to the phase 2 trial piece of it. And in the phase 2 trial, then you start recruiting a larger set of patient population across the borders, across the countries, to test the effectiveness and the efficacy of that drug furthermore. And once the results are turned out positive, then we move on to the phase 3 and phase 4 of the trial. Now, this is where a much more larger set of patient population comes into play and are recruited. We call this as the stress test, because this is where the drug is now further tested for its effectiveness and its reliability before the drug comes into the market or been approved by the regulators. Now, this only happens when every aspect of the drug safety and every aspect of the efficacy is been proven. The bridge will not be open to public to walk if the stress test doesn't work through. And that's exactly what happens in a drug development as well. And once this has been proven, the drug becomes available for the global patient population as a part of this process. And this is one of the reasons why I believe that clinical research is a collective act of people, process, trust, courage, and hope. From my experience of working for a reputed clinical research organization over the past few years, there's one thing definitely I believe, that every medicine is supported by a very strong ecosystem around the patient, ensuring that the clinical trials are delivered at the right time, in the right manner, and in the right condition so as to make sure that the drug is successfully approved and brought into the market. But before that happens, I think one thing we all need to realize that there is an education that's required of everyone who is as a part of this process. If Alice's doctor knew about the alternate care, he wouldn't have sent Alice back home to die with no options. If Alice's sister did not educate herself and did the detailed research and went online and found the alternate study that was available, today Alice wouldn't have had an alternate hope with the clinical study, right? That's the education that came into play. Similarly, both Alice and Mohini as patients, they had the courage. In spite of that critical condition, they educated themselves and provided the consent to be a part of the clinical study conduct so that they can keep that hope alive. And last but not the least, it's the caregivers, the family, who continues to keep faith in this well-documented process. This is why I said that the entire ecosystem needs to work together and everyone needs to play their part effectively. But in order for that part to be effective, so this is where I say that every stakeholder needs to play their part very effectively. And the reason why this whole process works so strongly is for the fact that nobody during the process falters in the role that they continue to play. But the most important factor that we continue to forget and we continue to keep reminding ourselves, there is someone who takes the courage to walk that bridge first even before that bridge is completed. And that's the patient. And which is why it's very critical to understand that takes a lot of courage and an educated decision making before the patient says yes to be a part of the clinical study conduct and create that second chance to survive. Now, let's all take a moment and think about that you have a loved one that is suffering from an illness. You've been asked to go into a pharmacy and you enter a pharmacy and you look that the shelves are completely empty. Now, this is what modern medicine would look like if clinical trials do not happen. There will be no cure available for any disease at any given point of time. Scary, isn't it? But this is the factor that we need to keep in mind. Even today, it's a brutal reality. We still have patients who are suffering from rare diseases. There are still some neglected diseases. There are still some diseases that today there is no clinical study option available. And because there is no clinical study option available, there's absolutely no cure available for them. A few years back, I met a patient, fantastic bubbling personality, had a great life, was living a very professional life into sales and marketing, was doing a fabulous work. And suddenly at the age of 25, she got a spinal disorder, something which was not known. It was a regenerative disorder that happened and she was pretty shocked. Suddenly, she was not able to stand for more than 3 minutes throughout the entire process. Her entire life got surrounded and restricted to a 4x4 bed. Now just imagine when she was talking to me and she said that her only hope and ask was that, is there a clinical study for the disease that I'm suffering from? Is there a cure that I can participate in so that I can help find a cure for this particular disease? And unfortunately, even today, there's no option available for that. And this is the reason why I say that the patient's needs to be taken into consideration when doing a drug development journey as well. What we do not want is an empty pharmacy. What we want is a full pharmacy so that every patient's needs are taken into consideration and then they are encouraged to develop new drugs and they're encouraged for further participation into the clinical trials. And that's what a full pharmacy and we should all aim for. But in order for that full pharmacy to work, clinical trials are one such reliable approach where a patient's voice is taken into consideration because it not only provides an early access but an healthcare access, but also gives them a hope to survive a second chance to live. And while the traditional clinical trial is happening, there's a lot of technological advancements that are taking place. As a part of this, the entire clinical landscape is also changing. One of the areas is the digital tools like the telemedicine, the remote monitoring. Concepts like this are becoming available and it's making much more easier for us And today we are able to take the clinical trials to patients' home. What is happening is because of that, we are not only removing the barriers of participation, but we are also providing better healthcare access to our patients by doing these decentralized trials. The second aspect I wanted to highlight is with the advancement of quantum computing and also digital twins, a time will come, and we are not far away from that, that we will be able to predict a safety adverse event on a drug even before that adverse event happens on a patient. What does this mean? That means in future, the clinical trials are going to be more predictable. And not only that, but the patient participation will be much, much more safer. So if I have to bring all of this together, we spoke about the stakeholders who make this process happen. We spoke about the clinical study process itself, like what goes through a clinical study conduct. But if I have to give 3 takeaways from everything that we just spoke about, the 3 things that I really want to highlight. One, I think we still need a continued education and a trusted ecosystem to be developed of everyone, not only the clinical participants, but everyone who is a part of the process globally, so that we can encourage more clinical participation, so that we can get trials into the market and we can get better therapies for patients. The second piece is, I think at the end of the day, we need to start thinking about clinical trials not as a last resort, but as an alternate therapy or as a secondary therapy to the primary care that has been provided at any given point of time. And last but not the least, we cannot forget that when we are designing a clinical trial, we need to keep the patient's need in mind. We need to keep in mind the needs that are currently existing, the neglected therapies that are out there that today needs attention. And based on that, the drug development and the study design needs to be kept in mind. So the patient has to be at the heart of every protocol design that we are making. So these are the 3 takeaways that I personally believe needs to be kept in mind as I wrap this up. So clinical research to me is not just about process or it's all about data. It's about patient as a human being with a hope to action that can provide better health care and give a second chance to live. Thank you.